Hey free-to-play gang, welcome back to another tier list video. Now I don't want to keep churning out all of these tier lists, but a lot of you guys requested for the ABILIMON tier list, and I know I'm kind of like very behind schedule right now on my ABILIMON tier list. I think the last time that I did it was like maybe like more than half a year ago. So we are just gonna quickly go through the brand new ABILIMON tier list. But first, before we get into that, I do have some guidelines. There is so many, right? There is 5, okay? But anyway, all of these espers, they are considered at R2 because I think R2 is probably when they become useful, like in most cases, right? But for the Shiva Legendaries, they will only be R0 unless the esper is free. So for example, if you're talking about Lucas, for example, we are just going to talk about him as an R6. We are not going to talk about Lucas as an R2. We're not going to talk about Everett as an R0 as well, right? So R6. Now, second point is that this is not a full skill up video, okay? So, for example, Nusi, her first skill is like completely dog shit. Ahmed, his first skill is also completely dog shit, right? This is all it does. So, this video will not give you an idea of whether you should max skill your esper. It is just show you max the important skills of this esper if you could. So, for example, if I could choose to max out Ahmed's third skill, like how relevant would that choice be? So that's what this video is going to investigate. And the third point is that this video would just be an overall usefulness video. So for example, if you're going to talk about Cecilia or maybe even Ollie, right? So it is obviously a good thing to lower all their skill cooldown. So for example, if you could choose to raise all of your skills to the max level, obviously you would take that choice. But because of how rare and how scarce legendary ABILIMONs are, is it meaningful? Is it useful that you max skill a certain esper when you can use something else, for example, something cheaper, right? So that is also going to take part in how I determine how certain espers are placed within this tier list itself. And of course, this brings me to the cost effectiveness, right? Because legendary ABILIMONs are so rare, does it really make a lot of sense for you to level up this skill just to gain, like, I don't know, 10% more damage mitigation, 10% more proc rate, right? That kind of stuff. These are important questions to ask. And I will try my best to consolidate all of these into this single video. And it's going to be a little bit longer because we're going to talk a little bit more about some skills that are good, some skills that are bad. But the fifth and most important point is that this entire video is completely biased to my perspective. And I did collect some information from some of the members from my Discord server, so a huge shout out to you guys. But for the most part, it's just to double check whether my thought process is sound or not, and not so that I can copy any ideas from anyone. So at the end of the day, I will agree with my own tier list. It is not swayed in a direction that I wouldn't want to. But yeah, so anyway, without further ado,
let's get started.
So we're gonna start off with the Wasteful tier. And now the Wasteful tier, like I said, it's not that it wouldn't make sense for you to skill them up. If you could skill them up, obviously you would skill them up. But the reason why it is wasteful is because it's either not useful, not so useful, or the cost effectiveness is just really, really terrible. Now the first esper, we have Yuhime, and the reason why she is considered wasteful is because you don't really need her skills to come up so frequently. Like her third skill, I don't really think it makes a lot of sense for you to skill this thing up because it only increases her damage output. For the most part, she is ready at the get-go. Like she's just going to use her third skill, she's also going to go into her second skill for unlimited AoE attack. So yeah, in terms of skill ups, not really that important in my opinion. Next up, we have Liling. The reason why he's here is because he is just not a very good esper right now at R2. But I do feel like he is actually a really good esper at R6. This will be another conversation for a different day. Next esper, we have Ife. Now this is going to be a biased opinion, okay? So the thing is, I don't use Ife and I will never ever skill her up because there are just much better epic esper options. Like you have the twins, you have Longmian, you have Kara. For most content, she is definitely replaceable. Even if you're talking about Calamity Island, you can definitely use other espers. You can even use an R0 Embler. I mean, it's going to be quite difficult, but it is still possible. Now, sadly, this is going to be a very big topic. The reason why I have her down in Wasteful is because I think pre-R6, she don't really serve a lot of purpose right now based on the content that we already have. So in terms of beating content that we already have, you do not need a pure support. You do not need a pure healer. You do not need a pure damage mitigator, for example. So even if you're talking about PvP, I don't think it really makes a lot of sense if your Sally is not R6, because then you're not even going to start off with your damage mitigation, which means you're going to get clips. But in terms of like PvE content, I don't think having a soul healer is actually that important for like most content. I mean, there's going to be like certain niche reasons why you want to use her, but like I said, you know, just go for control, just go for speed, just go for damage. Any of those are a lot better than trying to resort onto healing. Next up, we have Dona. He's just a trash esper, so we're gonna skip. Now, Biondina. Okay, so this is the interesting thing about Biondina. Now, the main thing is that her passive is what makes her good, but at the same time, it does require certain skill ups to be efficient. I feel like she is consistent enough even without this, because you can always use Espers who can strip buff. So you can always use a Nusi, you can use a Tricky, you can use, Bonnie. You can use Espers to strip buff so that she can be effective. You do not need to rely on her buff strip itself. And for the most part, she's a one-trick pony. The moment you throw her third skill, you're going to kill something and then you move on with your life after that, right? You don't really need this skill to cycle all that often, because at that point, you know what, just run something else. Just run an AoE cleaving team instead, right? Now next we have Yamato. Like I said, he is useless below R6. And as for Tangshan, I just feel like he lacks a lot of purpose. And the thing is, in terms of his skill cooldowns, they are already relatively short. So he has 4 turns on his third skill without any skill ups. He has 3 turns on his second skill, which is actually not a good idea to max his second skill, because his first skill and his third skills are what sells him the most. But for the most part, I think his cooldowns are already really low, and there is very little reason why you need to max skill him like I did. This is really not needed at all. But I mean, this kind of helps for my R6 showcase eventually, so yeah. Next up, we have Ophelia. I feel like there is not enough content for her to meaningfully want to max her skill, because her third skill has a 3 turns cooldown, which is really nice, but it's not that meaningful. Like, I totally regret scaling her up, and I wish I had rewinded her, but I did not. So yeah, big L on my part. Next up for height, I feel like unless you're really crazy about PvP, it does not make sense to skill him up at all, because his third skill, you don't need a cooldown reduction. In terms of the damage output, you don't really need it as well. His damage grows as the fight drags on. Like, this amount of difference is not that significant in my opinion, not even on his first skill as well, because I mean the HP ceiling decrease, all that, I don't think this is reason enough for you to max skill him. Next we have Jiang Julie. His demon form is probably like the main thing, and that does not cooldown reduce as you max skill him, so it is completely irrelevant. And same goes for Cecilia. Her reviving skill cannot be cooldown reduced, so it doesn't make a lot of sense unless you want to go for her healing capabilities. But the thing is, when you're running Cecilia, you're running her in PvP tanky comms, but at the same time, then you would also be running Ahmed, so Ahmed is going to do the healing for you, I think. But of course, in terms of cleansing, she's pretty good, but you also will run a Jinyu Yao with her, so Cecilia, Jinyu Yao, Ahmed, these 3 are really good together. You don't really need to max skill Cecilia in my opinion. Alright, so that's it for the Wasteful tier. Let's move on with the not urgent tier. Now this is going to be extremely surprising, but Embla is actually on the not urgent tier. In fact, I might go as far as to say that you don't even need to skill up Embla at all. Okay, so the reason for that is because her third skill, all it really does, all the difference that it really is that it lands defense breaks. That's about it. Other than that, it does apply Corrupted Seed and it does double hit, which is it's pretty. My cat is playing. Okay, I apologize. It's pretty good for the double hit, but her first skill is actually really good because this skill stacks Corrupted Seeds very well. So although it only hits once, if you're attacking an enemy with a Corrupted Seed, you will attack someone else and apply another Corrupted Seed stack. So that allows you to spread a lot faster. So it makes a lot of sense for you to not skill her up so that she can use her first skill a little bit more often. And of course, the second skill, I think most people can agree that this skill is actually her downfall. The best thing is to not even skill up her second skill at all, because like 70 to 80% of situations, you will never ever need to use this skill. Like, you would always prefer to use your first skill instead of your second skill, because that allows you to infect other enemies a little bit more efficiently while at the same time dealing more damage with your extra hit. Now next we have Elliot. I feel like he is probably an Esper that you do not need to urgently rush him, because he is going to taunt enemies, which means they are going to attack him, and with that, that's actually going to reduce his cooldowns just by receiving attacks. So that is also a strat. The reason why I max skilled him is because I'm currently super endgame, and having this skill cooldown is going to help me win a lot of fights. But like I said, at R2, not important at all. Hey, PP! PP, come here! PP! Now next up we have Nama, and the only reason why you want to scale him up is mostly just to increase his DPS at the end game when you're trying to use a Nama to cleave stuff. Oh my god. Alright, I apologize to everyone. Apologize. And next up we have Lewis, and very similar to Nama, I think he's just more for like PvP purposes, so not super important, it's just for increasing DPS, that's about it. Now next up for Lucas, this is actually a major shift for me, okay? So I previously put Lucas all the way at like max because of his third skill. So lowering his third skill cooldown from 6 to 4 is massive in my opinion. But I think for the most part, the reason why I'm bringing him down is because I don't really like his multipliers that much anymore. So after using him for the entirety of the Inferno Tower, I kind of feel like they do need to raise his multipliers a little bit, but I understand that he's a free R6, but I also do feel like just because his multipliers are not that good right now, then I think using his first skill more is probably more efficient for using Lucas in general. Next we have Javid, and I would say that he's actually pretty good with skill ups, but the reason why he is not urgent in my opinion is because he's just not that good, especially since there are much better like DPS alternatives. So you have Jiangman, for example, much better overall. And I mean, you have Embla, you have the twins who are capable of dealing pretty good AoE damage as well. There is a lot of other alternatives, right? Camille, Zora, that kind of stuff. But we'll get into Zora in just a little bit. Now, next up, we have Leora for Not Urgent. And I think you only kind of want to skill her up only if you want to improve her DPS output. Because for the most part, she's always going to get her cooldowns reset at the start of every single wave, which is why people use her, right? So that they can spam her skill without needing to worry about her skill cooldowns. But of course, like I said, if you really want to increase the damage output of her third skill, for example, from 105% to 120%, which is a pretty decent change, then I think, yeah, it's probably something that you can consider down the line. But like I always say, straight up DPS is probably not so important. You can exchange that via just having better equipment. Next, we have Ollie. Now, this is going to be a contentious topic because some people say that Ollie works really well with skill ups, but in my own personal opinion, right, let me just show you my Ollie. So in my opinion, I don't think that he needs skill ups at all because his passive just needs to go once and that's about it, right? You are going to survive and that's how you win a certain PvP fight. That's how you win certain content in PvE, for example. Or maybe you're just going to combo him with Yude, who will instantly reset all his cooldowns. So I think in that light, it might not be very sensible to raise his skill levels because your ABILIMONs are extremely rare and extremely precious, right? Now next we have Intisa, and I do feel like she's also in the realm of not that useful, therefore you don't really need to max skill her, but I do understand that it's quite important for you to spam her third skill, but for the most part, if you have her at R2, it actually makes a lot of sense that you do not even skill her up so that you will constantly use her first skill. And if the enemy has like a buff stripper, for example, they are always going to remove your buffs. And because you're spending more time on your first skill, you're actually going to use your third skill a lot more often, which is, it works well in her favor even without skill ups. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, next up, we have Zora. Let me just show you my R6 Zora, by the way. So R6 Zora, no skill ups. I don't feel like she's an Esper that you really need to skill up. I feel like it helps her damage output. It does help her rotation a little bit, but you know, for the most part, she works well in content where you have longer fights. So for example, you have Shadow Fire, you also have Celestial Anomaly, and guess what? You can always use the Ocean set on her like I am, and it's going to be fine. So you're going to have your rotations this way, and I think that's probably what's good enough for her. Like, do we really need to get her second skill down? I really don't think so. I think maybe her third skill for more AoE attacks, especially for Celestial Anomaly, right? Because don't forget, using her third skill goes straight into your first skill as well for a double AoE attack. So yeah, that kind of helps. But yeah, I think for the most part, you don't really need to skill up Zora, okay? Trust me, I have R6 Zora. Now next we have Valeria. The reason why she is here is because she increases DPS, that's about it. But for the most part, she lacks a lot of use in many content. I wouldn't say that she's wasteful because her third skill is actually not bad. It actually has a slow, which like I said before, it's an extremely rare debuff to have. So having a speed down on an Esper that scales with speed is very good because you're able to lap the enemies a lot. So yeah, very nice to have this skill cooldown reduced in my opinion. But yeah, like I said, right, it's just in terms of content, I don't think there is a lot of content that she would excel in. Now moving on to Tever, the reason why he is here is not because he is bad, okay? So he is very good, and part of the reason why he's very good is because you do not need skill ups on him at all unless you really want to increase the DPS output. But for the most part, if you're talking about an R0 Tever, I don't think you really want to invest a lot of skill ups into him to maximize his DPS output. I think if you had him at R2, then sure, let's discuss. Now, as for Raven, the reason why I put her all the way down here is because I feel like she, like Tever, also shines more at R2 where she's able to rotate her second skill more effectively. So when your Raven is at R2, I think it makes a lot more sense to lower her third skill's cooldown so that you can go back into your second skill more often because you're going to reset it more often that way, right? So that makes more sense in my opinion. Alright, so that is the not urgent tier. Let's move on with the good tier. Now, do try to understand that we are talking about R2 Espers over here. So when we're talking about Tangji, he is instantly a really good Esper at R2 because his third skill now would be able to swap the HP of one of your allies with the enemy. So that makes his third skill actually quite good. So with that, I think it makes a lot of sense for you to max out his third skill so that you can deal a lot of damage with his massive Exodia nuke, right? So if you do not know why Tangji is so good, please check out my Exodia video. You can like just probably search Dislyte Exodia, you're gonna find it. So yeah, Tangji, I think at R2, he's a pretty decent choice for maxing his skills. It's mostly just for sweeping PvP. I think he carries a lot at R2. Now next up for Jin Yu Yao, I personally do feel like she is not an urgent Esper to max because for the most part, it's her passive that sells her a lot. So if you have her at R2, she's just gonna keep taking a lot of turns and she's just gonna keep cleansing her team, which is really, really good. So I don't think that you really need to max skill her for the extra cooldown reduction. PP, what are you doing, PP? What are you doing, PP? But I do know that maxing her first skill is quite helpful because this increases the trigger chance from 50% to 75%, which, oh wait, is it 50? No, it's like, I think it was like, wait, what? Was it 45%? Probably like 45% to 75%. If you are on the Astro set, she is going to throw her first skill more and that's going to help with the stuns. I kind of feel like it's a little bit wasteful just to max her for her first skill. But hey, I mean, she's already in a good tier, so if you have the chance, definitely do try to pump some skills into her. Now next we have Ginny. Okay, so Ginny at R2 is a powerhouse. Now the thing is, when she's at R2, you want her to cycle a lot more effectively. So you want this skill cooldown to go down to 3 turns from 5 turns so that when she throws her second skill, she's gonna go straight into her third skill. And now I understand that the cooldown here is 5 turns, which reduces to 4 turns, which means that she will never have a perfect rotation of second skill into her third skill, which is normal. So what she's gonna look like is second skill into third skill, and then your first skill, followed by your second skill into your first skill, followed by your second skill into your third skill. So it's gonna move in this direction, like from her second to her third skill, from her second skill to her first skill, something like that. It's just gonna keep on rotating that way. That is her rotation, but it's very important that you max skill her so that she can stack a lot of Simmer Flame super fast. I mean intense hit, so that she can stack a lot of intense hit. Now the Phantom Sisters is pretty good if they fixed her AI. So the problem with her AI is that she will not actually revive any allies. She would still use this on Espers with the lowest HP, not dead allies, which is it's kind of sad. So they kind of have to fix this right now, I think. But if they're able to fix this skill, I think she is pretty good with skill ups because this lowers all of her skill cooldowns to about 4 turns. And also, you know, there is like the trigger chance increase and all that. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff in her kit that you want to max out because like for the most part, right, she has defense up here for 3 turns. You kind of want to lower this down to 4 turns for more perpetual defense buffs. And at the same time, her second skill provides speed up, which is really nice if you can keep spamming it. So yeah, she does have some helpful buffs, which is very needed for like Celestial Anomaly and some bossing content, like Sentinel Hunt, for example. I mean, yeah, you know, Sentinel Hunt. Or maybe even some PvP content, right? Now next we have Ethan. I do for the most part feel like an R2 Ethan is okay without skill ups. Like I have maxed my skills, don't get me wrong, and I feel like he's really good with skill ups, which is why he's in a good tier. But for the most part, I feel like his main selling point at R2 is to use him in PvP. I mean, you can obviously use him in PvE because he has cooldown increase on his second skill, he has immunity, he has increased DPS from his magic tune, a lot of stuff in his kit, he has defense breaks as well. So it does help, but I do think that most players tend to use Ethan for the sake of his instant magic tune at the start, for the instant 20 speed. And if that is the case, if that is you, then there is no urgency to max skill him at all. Like for the most part, maybe his second skill, right, just for a little bit more trigger chance, but aside from that, the speed advantage is probably what sells him the most at R2. Now next we have Mateo. This is probably a little bit contentious. You may not necessarily want to max skill him because his rotation is just insane, because if you're going to be using Mateo, you're going to be running him with Espers who will multi-hit and multi-crit as well, so that he gains a lot of turns via his, what was it, his Spark debuff, right? Yeah, so when the carrier takes a critical hit, Mateo gains 5% AP, so this benefits all of, I mean, all your allies can push his AP, so he's going to rotate super fast, which means you do not necessarily need to have his skills leveled up at all, I think. And in fact, I mean, his first skill already allows him to inflict the Spark debuff, which means that you do not even need to skill him up for the most part. Now next we have Elaine. Okay, so this is a very interesting topic, I think. So the thing is, Elaine works really well by spamming her second and third skills because these two skills bring really good debuffs, right? You have the attack down, very good for bossing, and you also have the buff blocker over here, very good for bossing. And having these skills rotate more frequently is very, very helpful, especially since these multi-hits as well. But for the most part, okay, the reason why I don't have her skilled up is because you will run her with Espers who extend debuff duration. So for example, I do run her a lot with the twins and Mateo. So these 4 Espers together, they multi-hit a lot, that gives Mateo more turns and he's able to spam more skills. But for the most part, because I am running the twins with her, they are going to extend all of these debuffs, right? They're going to extend the buff blocker, they're going to extend the attack down, which means I don't need her to rotate so fast. In fact, I can just rely on an Ocean set and that should cover my ground almost completely. But for the most part, she is still pretty good to skill up if you want to use her in other content without the twins, for example. Next, we have Camille, and now Camille's rotation is pretty good with skill ups, I must say. So it's very important that you max her third skill, not so much of her second skill, because as you can see, her second skill has a 3 turns cooldown, but at R6, you're going to go from your third skill into your second skill, which means these 2 skills should just have 4 turns of cooldown, and that is good enough for your rotation. But the reason why I went ahead to max her second skill is because this allows her to rotate even more when you have the Ocean set, because there is the opportunity that you're not going to waste skill cooldown. So if you use your third skill and you go into your second skill and then you pop an Ocean set, your rotation is only going to be 3 turns long this time around. So yeah, with the Ocean set, it makes a lot of sense to max her second skill for the extra skill cooldown. Now next for Ahmed, I personally feel like he is somewhere in between not urgent and good. So for the most part, I did not skill him up until I went very deep into the tanky meta in Point War, or like just general PvP content. So before that, he works perfectly fine without any skill ups. In fact, I would say that he's probably one of the least important Espers in the good tier in terms of skill ups. Like his first skill itself is already good on its own. You do not need to invest and risk so many skill ups just to reduce these skills cooldown by 1. 1. I mean, for the most part, right? I mean, the healing itself is nice, but it's only like 1.5%. It's not a big deal. So just using his first skill enough, you know, triple hit, that is able to provide a lot of supporting song, which is, in my opinion, good enough. You do not really need to skill him up unless you are trying to move further into PvP. Now next, the same is true for Everett as well. Now his third skill only increases damage mitigation by 10%. So he has a base of 10% and it's going to go up to 20%, which it's nice to have, but is it really urgent? Is 10% damage mitigation really that big of a deal? Is that going to change whether your team survives or not? I don't think so. So I feel like in general, it just helps with his DPS output, which increases healing and all that kind of fun stuff. But for the most part, skill ups, just a bit more for his proc rate, I guess. Now we are finally moving on to the important tier. Okay, so there is a couple of espers here who I would normally not put them in the important tier because they are DPS espers. So I'm talking about Brewster, I'm talking about Ashley. These two espers, I would deem them to be very important to skill up because of their rotation. So for example, if you have an R2, right? Amazing, Brewster R2 is freaking good. But the thing is, you want this skill to have a cooldown of 4 turns so that you can cycle through Ritual Miracles, for example. You can use your third skill on the first wave, you can use your third skill on the third wave, for example, right? So this allows his rotation. If his skill cooldown was at 5 turns, then this will not work. But also in general, when you want to use Brewster in longer fights, so Celestial Anomaly, for example, or maybe certain boss content like Dark Starlord, right? It is also very important that you have this skill reduced as much as possible so that he can continue stacking more of his reload attack buffs, which is his entire kit basically. So very good for rotation, I highly recommend it. And also his first skill, right? Increase the trigger chance from 80% all the way to 100%. Very important. 100% defense break, dude. Really, really good. And like I said, the same is true for Ashley. So Ashley, you just need her third skill for rotation purposes. So for example, in Chronos, right? If you're running a fast Ashley, you want her to use her third skill on the first wave with the attack buff, and then use her third skill on the boss wave as well for the attack up buff, and then you can do a lot of stuff. But for the most part, it is, you can do without this proper rotation. You can run her slow. That's still gonna work. But I do need her on 4 turns cooldown for my APEC team at least. So yeah, there is that. But anyway, like I said, in terms of rotation, in longer fights, you do need her third skill's cooldown to be reduced a lot so that you can spam more Rainbow Bridge stacks this way. Very similar to Brewster. Next, we have Yun Chuan, and he is actually one of those espers that I thought he's probably higher good tier or lower important tier. Now, reason being is that all he does is just assist. I mean, okay, it's not true that that's all he does, but the main selling point is his assist attacks, which you will not need skill cooldowns for that to work, right? You can just use your first skill, that's gonna apply more third eye seal, but the more meta strategy is you just use your third skill and then just use a poison or a bleeding esper to extend that to perpetuity, because whenever they take dot damage, you're actually going to reapply the third eye seal again. But for the most part, the reason why he is still in the important tier is because the speed down effect is so good. It is so good for so many different content, and of course on top of that, this also gives your entire team speed up, which is very, very helpful. So I do feel like in terms of support, it makes a lot of sense to max this skill. Then next we have Tricky, and in general it's just his rotation. Like if you have this skill on a 4 turns cooldown rotation, he's able to completely strip stuff all the time, right? Which is really good. So he has speed down, like I said, very important debuff, and you have miss rate up as well. So yeah, very nice. Okay, wait, hold on. One of these debuffs come with resonance. Let me double check. I think it's a speed down his R2, right? Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, so we are talking about R2 anyway. So Revolver inflicts speed down on target about 2 turns. So very nice. You kind of want to have this skill to rotate as much as possible. So there we go. Now, the final esper for the important tier is going to be Xuanpin, and the reason is because I just don't feel like she is a must max. I think she can just throw a third skill and then go into a second skill afterwards, and you're basically done with a lot of different content. PvP, you are done. You don't need her to rotate so much. PvE, for example, Cube Miracle, for example, Temporal Tower, you don't need her to rotate all that much. You just need her to use the skill once, twice, that's about it, right? I mean, not even twice. Just use Checkmate once and then use the second skill once, and that's it. But in terms of longer fights, yes, then I would highly suggest that you max this skill so that she's able to call in a lot of ally assist and at the same time land a lot of attack buffs and a lot of other good stuff. So in terms of rotation in longer fights, yes, I would recommend it. Now we can finally move on to the final tier, which is the must max tier. So if you have espers in this tier, they are a must max for them to be either very effective or to just be completely broken as shit, right? So the first esper, which is a very worthy mention, is 100% going to be Abigail. If you take a look at her third skill, this is what makes her so good for, I don't know, maybe holo battles, RTA, or certain PvE content. The reason why this skill is so good, take a look at this. AP increases by 100%. So when you revive one ally, they instantly take a turn, they gain an attack up buff, they gain absorb as well. Boom, 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 a lot of good stuff. Now, what if you didn't max this skill, right? You would only revive the ally with 70% AP, which is completely like that's not very useful in my opinion, because they are just gonna revive with 10% of their max HP. They are most likely gonna die unless you somehow are able to control the enemy's AP, which for the most part honestly just max his skill, and then you have a good time. And also her rotation is pretty nice, because going from her third skill into her second skill, that's going to allow you to spam your buffs a lot more frequently. Now next on the list we have Clara, and the reason why she's all the way up here is just because she is, in my opinion, an EX++ tier Esper. So like I said, okay, if you're talking about R2, she has 2 turns of immunity here. This skill is so freaking strong. So in terms of PvP, her 2 turns of immunity, like I said, is going to allow you to avoid Avatar counters or like stun procs and freeze procs, that kind of stuff. So it is very important that this skill has 2 turns of immunity. 1 turn of immunity is not good enough to protect you from Avatar procs. And also with a shorter cooldown, you're going to have more AP pushing, which is always helpful for all kinds of content. More healing as well, more shielding, more cleansing, a lot of good stuff from her third skill, right? Then Gaius, okay, this one is a definite must max, not because he is strong, but if you do not max his skill, especially his third skill, your rotation is going to be completely off. So in order for him to transform every single wave, you need his third skill to be maxed, because you go from your Thunderstorm into your second skill, and then moving on to the second wave, your third skill would have his cooldown ready. If not, you will need to wait 1 more turn before you can use your third skill again, which completely breaks his cycle. So you must max his third skill. It's very important. And fourth Esper on the list, we have Tia. The reason why she is here is just purely because of brokenness. Like, she is really good without skill ups, okay? But if you do give her skill ups to reduce her cooldowns, oh my god, she's gonna spam this so crazily. Like, right now I have her on Ocean set, she is insane. Like, she has so much AP absorb on her first skill, she has AP absorb on her second skill, she has AP absorb on her third skill. It's so freaking good. Like, her rotation is so good. So reducing her cooldown is going to make her extremely broken, which is why she's all the way up here. Now next for Gabrielle, kind of straightforward. You want to have a defense break as often as possible. You also want her immunity and defense up as often as possible, right? So just pray very hard that you don't go into your first skill, and yeah, you're all set. Now we're almost there, guys. The third last Esper is going to be Sienna. Now I would think that she is probably on the lower end of must max because of Tia. Like because we have Tia right now, I think Tia takes a superb priority over Sienna. But for the most part, if you have her at R2, her buff is actually going to last for 3 turns, which is insane. Attack up and speed up for 3 turns. You definitely want to reduce her cooldown from 6 to 4 turns. It's so important. And of course, in terms of rotation, by reducing her cooldowns generally across the board, with the Ocean set, 5 turns on her third skill and 4 turns on her second skill. If you proc your Ocean set, this is going to go down to effectively 4 turns or maybe even 3 turns at times. So yeah, very powerful stuff. Rotation super important for her kit. Now, second last Esper, we have Feng Nusi. So very similar to Tia, the reason why she's here is not because you need to max all of her skills. Okay, take a look at her first skill. This skill is entirely shit. You do not want to level this skill up at all. But the reason why you want to fully skill up is so that she becomes extremely broken. Like her third skill, you just want this to have a 4 turns cooldown, perpetual reset, and her second skill as well. This is like chef's kiss. So you want these 2 skills to be maxed. That is what's important for her kit. You could perpetually lock down enemies even in PvP. It is that insane. Okay, and I just realized I don't have Unas, so there's nothing to showcase here. Okay, so the last and final Esper for today's video is going to be Unas. I do feel like he is also a must max. Now, like I said before, in the previous tier list video, I don't think that Unas is at the same level as he were, but just in terms of sheer rotation, he has the biggest AP push on the fastest Esper in the game with a 3 turns cooldown. I think that's actually pretty solid. So that's going to give you a lot of extra turns, especially in like PvE content. So like Celestial Anomaly, for example, that's going to push your team perpetually, which is always very nice. But of course, if you do have him at R2, then yes, an extra attack buff is always very helpful. It's very powerful. So anyway, all in all, that's it for the ABILIMON tier list you guys requested for this. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from this. If you have any comments, any feedback, anything that you disagree with, agree with, or whatsoever, feel free to leave it down in the comment section below and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed today's content. If you did, don't forget to thumbs up. It really helps the channel, and subscribe for more Dislyte content. Now with that said, this has been Derek Free to Play, and as always, I will see you in the next video.